Ma'am, this is just business. That's what the maintenance guy muttered when I caught him stapling an eviction notice over the wreath on my apartment door. Just business, like it was a coupon. Like my life could be folded and torn along a dotted line. My name is Clara Whitmore. I'm 34, a data analyst at a mid-size port logistics firm, and I live on the second floor of a brick walk-up on B Street in Charleston, South Carolina. 2 weeks ago my appendix ruptured out of nowhere. Emergency surgery. 3 nights in the hospital. I came home moving like glass, stitches tight, pain meds rationed, and a neat stack of bills that looked taller every time I blinked. I was making tea when I heard the stapler. By the time I opened the door, the paper was already flapping in the coastal humidity. Notice to vacate. 30 days. Signed by Patrick Hensley, my landlord. I called him before the paper stopped shaking. Straight to voicemail. Then a text from an unknown number. New ownership transition, your lease is month to month. We need units empty for renovation. Sorry for the inconvenience. PH. I read it twice then again because none of it fit with the lease I'd signed. I wasn't month to month. I had 9 months left. I'd never missed a payment. I'd never been late. Patrick had said exactly that at Christmas when the heater went out and I gave his contractor hot cocoa while we waited for the part. You're the tenant every landlord hopes for, Clara. Apparently that lasted until the ink dried on a sales contract I hadn't known existed. Across the hall Mrs. Lowry cracked her door. She's in her 70s, white hair in a tidy braid, the kind of neighbor who remembers everyone's birthday and waters plants that aren't hers. She peered at the notice, lips thinning. They tried that with me last week. I told them to bring a sheriff or bring a lawyer. They brought neither. New ownership? I asked. She nodded toward the lobby. They took down the old mailboxes yesterday. Said we're getting amenities. She made the word sound like a threat. They want the long-timers out. We pay too little. 2 more doors opened like eyes. Kenneth from 2A, a chef who works nights, held up his own notice. Noelle from 3C, a grad student who bakes when she's stressed, had one too. The hallway filled with that buzzy, sour feeling of a storm rolling in. I pressed my palm against the tender seam of stitches along my side. I just got out of the hospital, I said. It came out small and stupid, as if Patrick Hensley would call off the bulldozers because I was bruised. The maintenance guy wouldn't meet my eyes. Back inside, I pulled my lease from the blue accordion folder where I keep adult life. Taxes, warranty cards, oil change receipts. Lease terms, start and end dates. Written notice requirements. Habitability clauses. There was, clear as the tide chart on my fridge. They couldn't do this. Not like this. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a voicemail from Patrick. I put it on speaker and set it on the counter because lifting anything heavier than a mug still hurt. Clara, his voice began, smooth, tired. I got your message. Look, as I said, this is a transition. The building's being repositioned. The new partners require vacant delivery on certain units. You're not targeted. This is across the board. I'll make sure you get your deposit back in full and, I can write you a letter of recommendation. All right. Again, nothing personal. Nothing personal. The phrase should come with a laugh track. I breathed in slow like the physical therapist taught me. Exhale. Count to 4. It didn't lower the heat in my chest. My mom texted too, as if the universe wanted to make sure I got the full set. How are you feeling? Are you back at work yet? I stared at the bubbles blinking for a long time, then typed, got an eviction notice while I was making tea. She called, voice gusting through the speaker. Oh honey. We can put boxes in the garage for a bit. I pictured their bit turning into forever and my things fossilizing under camping gear. I told her I'd figure it out. Always do. I went hunting for facts. County property records are public if you know where to look, and spreadsheets are how I pray. I sat at the kitchen table with a heating pad and opened my laptop. Hensley Properties LLC had owned the building for 8 years. 2 weeks ago, 2 days before my surgery, they'd filed a transfer deed to Salt Plus Palmetto Holdings. The buyer's address traced back to a suite in a shiny new development near the Ravenel Bridge. The managing member's name jumped out at me. P. Hensley. So there was. Not new ownership. You shall. Same man. I scrolled further and found what I was afraid I'd find. Permit applications flagged as renovation to add luxury features. The kind of renovation that needed empty units, photos with Edison bulbs, and rent that tripled. The kind that turned a house into a brand and people into price points. A brittle laugh scraped out of me. They were going to reposition me right out of my home because the backsplash didn't photograph well enough. I printed the lease clauses, highlighted the parts that mattered, and started a list in the margin. Lease term binding. No cause stated. Medical hardship, documented. Ownership transfer is not equal to termination. Pattern of notices to long-term tenants. At the bottom I wrote one more line I didn't highlight. Don't let them push you. When I opened my door to slip a copy of my lease under Patrick's office door downstairs, I found Mrs. Lowery already in the hallway with a tray. Tea for me, coffee for Kenneth, banana bread for whoever walked by. She squeezed my elbow gently. If you need help, I have a nephew who knows things. What kind of things? I asked. The kind people like Mr. Hensley don't want tenants to know. She smiled, thin and fierce. City code. Paper trails. Names. The pain throbbed under my ribs, stubborn and bright. I might take you up on that. She nodded toward my laptop bag. Good. And keep notes. Men like him count on us being tired. I was tired. Hurt. Feared. But suddenly, under all of that, there was something else, clear and sharp as the first cold front after a Charleston summer. Resolve. I slid Patrick's copy under his office door and snapped a photo of it on the floor, time-stamped. Then I returned to my kitchen table, opened a blank document, and typed a title at the top. Hensley/Salt plus Palmetto. Violations, patterns, outcomes. If he wanted to make my life just business, I could do business too. And I was going to make sure he remembered my name. The next morning I woke to the sound of rain tapping against my bedroom window. Charleston rain isn't shy. It's the kind that slaps the glass and pools on the street until the drains give up. I shuffled into the kitchen, careful of the ache in my side, and fired up the coffee maker. There were 3 new texts on my phone. One from my boss checking if I'd be ready to return on Monday, one from Mom offering a casserole, and one from an unknown number. Don't fight this, Clara. You'll just make it worse. No name. No signature. Just that. My stomach tightened. I forwarded it to myself, saved the screenshot in a folder labeled Evidence, and then blocked the number. If Patrick thought he could scare me with anonymous warnings, he was underestimating how much hospital nights teach you about endurance. Mrs. Lowery knocked around noon, her braid damp from the rain. She had a man with her, mid-40s, glasses, a messenger bag slung across his chest. This is my nephew Julian, she said. He's a housing advocate with the city. Thought he might take a look at your lease. Julian wiped his glasses and scanned the pages like they were a crossword puzzle. Yeah, this is solid. They can't just push you out without cause. And medical hardship? Courts take that seriously. Plus, he looked up, lowering his voice. Salt plus Palmetto has been on our radar. They're known for renovictions. I'd heard the word before but never had it applied to me so precisely. The idea made my skin prickle. You don't think of yourself as part of a trend until someone names it. Do you have proof they're doing it to other tenants? He asked. I've got at least 2 neighbors with notices, I said. Maybe more. Julian smiled faintly. Then let's get organized. The 3 of us spent the afternoon in my kitchen, rain thrumming in the background. We made a spreadsheet. Tenant names, lease terms, notice dates. Kenneth came by on his way to work, apron slung over his shoulder, and added his information. Noelle texted hers between classes. By 4 o'clock the pattern was clear. Everyone with a long-term lease and below-market rent was getting the 30-day treatment. The units with newer, higher-paying tenants? Untouched. Julian leaned back in his chair. This isn't just shady, it's actionable. They're banking on you not knowing your rights. That's the thing, I said, flipping through the printouts I'd pulled from the county website. They're hiding behind this new ownership story, but Patrick Hensley's name is on both sides of the transfer. It's a shell. Julian's eyebrows lifted. And you have that in writing? I slid the deed across the table. His grin widened. Then we've got leverage. For the first time since the notice went up on my door, the weight in my chest lightened. Not gone but shifting. I wasn't just flailing anymore. I had a thread to pull. When they left, Mrs. Lowery handed me a small spiral notebook. For when things get messy, she said. Write down every call, every knock, every word. Dates and times. Memory's one thing, paper's another. I promised I would. That night, lying in bed, I listened to the rain ease into silence. My stitches itched. The smell of Mrs. Lowry's banana bread still clung to the air. Somewhere in the building, a door slammed hard enough to rattle my window. I thought about Patrick's smooth voicemail voice, the unsigned text message, the amenities that would replace people like me. They wanted me to leave quietly. But now I had a list of names, a folder full of proof, and the beginnings of a plan. And I was just getting started. 2 days later, the amenities arrived. Not for us, of course. Not for the tenants who were being shown the door. These were for the glossy future Salt Plus Palmetto was trying to sell. Contractors in neon vests hauled in gym equipment through the side entrance. Someone wheeled past with boxes of Edison bulbs. A sign leaned against the wall in the lobby. Coming soon, rooftop lounge and pet spa. I stood in the hallway with my coffee, watching the transformation happen around me. It was like witnessing your own house being staged for strangers while you were still living in it. Around noon there was a knock on my door. I expected Mrs. Lowry or Kenneth. Instead, Patrick Hensley himself stood there, wearing a pressed polo and that salesman's smile that makes you check your wallet. "Clara," he said, drawing my name out like we were old friends. "Can I come in for a quick chat?" I didn't move from the doorway. "Whatever you have to say can be said here." He glanced past me into the apartment. The thrift store bookshelves, the worn but clean couch, the stack of hospital bills on the coffee table. "Look, I get that you're upset. But this is a business decision. I'm willing to offer you a cash for keys deal. $2,000 if you vacate by the end of next week." I let the number hang in the air a second before answering. "You're offering me less than a month's rent in this city to leave my home while I'm recovering from surgery? It's more than generous," he said, that smile tightening. "Most people would take it. Most people don't have a signed lease that says they don't have to." His jaw flexed, but the smile stayed. "Clara, I'm trying to help you here. If you drag this out, things get complicated." There was the same unspoken threat as the anonymous text, now wearing a friendlier face. I pulled out my phone and, without breaking eye contact, tapped the record button. "Could you repeat that last part?" He blinked, the mask slipping for half a second. "Forget it," he muttered, turning toward the stairs. "Think about the offer." When the door closed, I set my phone on the counter and replayed his voice, crisp and clear. Evidence. That afternoon, Julian emailed me a copy of a city housing ordinance, one I'd never heard of, that restricted evictions for substantial renovations, unless tenants were provided with equivalent accommodations during the work. Patrick had skipped that part entirely. We drafted a letter citing the ordinance, the lease clauses, and the medical hardship. Julian suggested we send it certified so there'd be no "I didn't get it" games. I added one more attachment, a transcript of Patrick's thinly veiled threat. 2 days later my phone rang again. This time it wasn't Patrick. "This is Alexandra Quinn with the Charleston Daily Chronicle," the voice said. "We've received a tip about evictions at the B Street property. I'd like to get your side of the story." I glanced at the evidence folder on my desktop. Lease, deed transfer, spreadsheet of tenants, voicemail transcript. And for the first time I let myself smile. "I think I can help you with that," I said. Alexandra Quinn showed up 2 hours later, raincoat still damp from the drizzle outside. She was younger than I expected, maybe late 20s, with a press badge clipped to her collar and a recorder in her hand. We sat at my kitchen table, same spot Julian had turned into a war room, and I laid everything out. The notice, the shell company deed, the spreadsheet of tenants, Patrick's voicemail, and the recording from our hallway conversation. She listened without interrupting, eyes narrowing when I explained the new ownership lie. "You have dates, documents, corroborating tenants," she said, flipping through my neat piles. "This isn't just one bad eviction. This is a pattern." "That's what Julian thinks," I said. "He says they've done this in other neighborhoods too. Push people out, slap in a rooftop deck, triple the rent." "Renoviction," Alexandra said, almost under her breath. "City hates the word, developers hate it more. Makes for a good headline." He asked if I'd go on record. My first instinct was to say no. I didn't want my face in the paper with "tenant fights landlord" under it like some pity piece. But then I thought about the anonymous text, Patrick's offer, and the way he'd looked past me into my living room like it was already his. "Yes," I said. "Full name." By the time she left, I'd given her a flash drive with every file I had. Mrs. Lowry caught her in the hallway and ended up giving a quote of her own. Something about how she'd seen landlords come and go, but never one willing to gut a community this fast. That night, I made soup and tried to pretend I wasn't refreshing the Chronicle website every half hour. At 9:17 p.m. the headline appeared. B Street tenants claim illegal evictions by local developer. The article was sharper than I'd dared to hope. My name was in the first paragraph. So was Patrick's. They'd printed the shell company documents, quoted Julian on the ordinance violations, even included a photo of Mrs. Lowry holding her notice with the bold letters facing the camera. By morning my phone was vibrating non-stop. Friends, old coworkers, even my boss sent messages of support. 3 more tenants from other Salt plus Palmetto properties reached out, saying the same thing was happening to them. At 11:04 a.m. Patrick finally called. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he snapped, all polish gone. I didn't bother hiding my smile. "Exercising my rights as a tenant and a citizen. You should try it sometime. You're going to regret this." I hung up before he could say more. It wasn't bravado. My hands were still shaking when I set the phone down. But under the adrenaline there was something steadier now. I wasn't just defending my apartment anymore. I was building a case. And Patrick had just handed me another piece of it. 2 mornings after the article went live, I opened my door to find a plain white envelope taped to it. My first thought was another threat. But inside was a letter on city letterhead. Notice of temporary stay of eviction. B Street Apartments. Pursuant to City Housing Ordinance 14-92, no tenant may be removed under substantial renovation provisions without approved relocation accommodations. It was signed by Helen Romero, Director of Housing Compliance. A phone number was scrawled at the bottom with "Call me" in neat looping handwriting. When I reached her, Helen's tone was brisk but warm. "Ms. Whitmore, we've issued a 30-day freeze while we review the legality of these notices. Your story brought some interesting things to our attention." I glanced at my kitchen table, still covered in stacks of documents. "What kind of things?" "Other properties," she said. "Same LLC transfers, same owner name, same sudden evictions. We're pulling records now." It was the first tangible piece of good news since this began. A pause button. Not a win yet, but enough to breathe. Mrs. Lowry stopped by with fresh muffins and her own letter from the city. Kenneth waved his from across the hall. Even Noelle, usually quiet, was grinning as she left for class. By afternoon the contractors were packing up. No more gym equipment deliveries, no more amenities going in. Patrick must have gotten the same call we did. Julian came over after work, still in his button-down and city ID badge, and dropped into a chair. "You realize what you've done, right? You've put them on defense." I poured him coffee. "Feels like we're still just surviving." He shook his head. "Not anymore. Surviving is when you're waiting for the next blow. He tapped the city letter. "This is the first punchback." Later that evening my phone buzzed with an email from Alexandra. She was working on a follow-up, and one of her sources had something I needed to see. Attached was a scanned memo from Salt plus Palmetto's internal files. It listed every current tenant, their lease rate, and a red or green mark next to their names. All the red marks. People with lower rents and older leases. Beside mine, in block letters, it said, "Vacate Hissy medical leave." My hands curled into fists. Not only had they targeted me, they'd flagged my recovery as an opportunity. That night, as I slid the memo into my evidence folder, I realized the fight had changed again. They weren't just breaking the law. They were going to have to answer for it. By the next morning, Patrick wasn't pretending anymore. At 8:12 a.m., I heard heavy knocking downstairs. Through the peephole, I spotted 2 men in plain clothes pacing the hallway, clipboards in hand. They knocked on Mrs. Lowry's door, then Kenneth's. By the time they reached mine, I had my phone ready. "Inspection," one said. "No badge, no ID." "For what?" I asked, not opening the door. "Routine safety check. Need to get inside." "Then you can schedule it through the city inspector's office," I said. "Or show me a warrant." One of them smirked. "We can always come back with a locksmith." I hit the record button on my phone. "And that's exactly what I'll tell the police when I call them. What are your names?" They didn't answer. Just muttered something and walked off. 5 minutes later, I was on the phone with Helen Romero. "They're trying to harass you into leaving," she said flatly. "Document everything. If they set foot inside without your consent, call 911. That afternoon, Alexandra's second article dropped, and it was brutal. She'd gotten on-the-record quotes from other tenants across the city, tied them directly to Patrick's properties, and included the leaked internal memo with my name on it. The headline: Developer flagged tenants on medical leave for eviction priority. It spread fast. Local news picked it up. A radio host called for interviews. The B Street building was suddenly a story the whole city seemed to know. That's when Patrick switched tactics. A courier arrived at my door with a thick envelope. Inside was a formal notice to cure, a laundry list of supposed lease violations, storing a bicycle on my balcony, hanging unauthorized shelves, even frequent disruptive visitors. I almost laughed. My idea of a wild night was finishing a novel at 11 p.m. Julian read the notice over my shoulder. This is retaliation. Classic move. Completely illegal while the stay is in effect. Then we respond, I said. And we don't just send it to him, we send it to the city, the press, and every tenant he's trying to scare. By evening, my email had a new thread labeled retaliation evidence. The photo of the courier's envelope was the first attachment. The second was a screenshot of Patrick's name trending locally on Twitter. The third was a message from an unfamiliar sender. You think you've won, Clara? You have no idea who you're dealing with. I saved it without replying, because now I was starting to. 2 days later, I got the call that changed everything. It was Alexandra. You sitting down? She asked, and her voice had that electric undercurrent reporters get when they know they've landed something big. 1 second. I slid into the kitchen chair, laptop open, coffee cooling beside me. Hey, what have you got? An internal email from Salt plus Palmetto's investment partners. Not just Patrick. We're talking a half-dozen stakeholders. They're furious. Apparently this little eviction spree of his wasn't cleared with everyone. And get this, they want out. I blinked. Out. They think the PR damage is going to sink future developments. One of them is already talking to the city about offloading their share of B Street. For a moment I didn't say anything. The idea that Patrick might be abandoned by his own partners felt poetic. And, Alexandra continued, one of those partners is willing to go on record if the city opens a formal investigation. He says there are financial records showing Patrick overbilling for renovations and pocketing the difference. There it was, leverage beyond the eviction violations. Fraud. Julian came over that afternoon and I laid it all out for him. He paced the kitchen, muttering to himself, then stopped abruptly. If we can tie the overbilling to the eviction pattern, it's not just housing law. It's criminal. That night we worked until nearly midnight. We cross-referenced city permit applications with contractor invoices, pulling anything that smelled wrong. Sure enough, the numbers didn't match. Not once, not twice, but dozens of times. And then I found it, a renovation permit filed for my unit. Work supposedly completed last month. The contractor's invoice said $8,450 for luxury kitchen upgrades. I stared at my modest galley kitchen with its chipped laminate counters and laughed out loud. Patrick had billed his own investors for renovations that never happened, and he'd used my apartment to do it. Julian grinned when he saw it. That's your smoking gun. The next morning I sent the file to Helen at the housing office, Alexandra at the Chronicle, and for good measure, the city's fraud tip line. If Patrick thought this was just about forcing me out quietly, he was about to learn that the real renovations were happening in his reputation. And the demolition crew? That was me. By Friday morning, the air in the B Street building felt different. The contractors were gone. The lobby sat quiet, half-painted walls abandoned mid-roll. Even the ever-present smell of fresh sawdust had faded. Mrs. Lowry said she'd seen Patrick's silver SUV parked out front early, but he hadn't come inside. He's spooked, she whispered like we were in a spy movie. He knows something's coming. Something was. At 10:15 a.m. Helen from housing called. Clara, I need you to listen carefully. The city attorney is greenlighting a formal investigation into both the eviction violations and the financial irregularities you sent over. I gripped the phone tighter. You mean the fake renovations? That and more. We've confirmed overbilling at 3 other properties. And there's enough to get a warrant for the B Street records. You should expect a visit from inspectors today. By noon, 2 city vehicles and an unmarked sedan were out front. Inspectors fanned through the building, clipboards in hand. Tenants peeked from their doors like it was a parade. I gave them my folder, neatly tabbed every document in order, and watched them carry it into the office Patrick used as his base. At 3:07 p.m., Alexandra's email landed in my inbox. From alexandra.quinn@chronicle.com. Subject: You're going to want to see this. Patrick's partners have just filed to dissolve Salt plus Palmetto Holdings. Public record. Also, one of them claims Patrick has been moving funds into a personal account under the name Hensley Redevelopment Trust. Guess where that account is registered? The Cayman Islands. I forwarded it to Helen without comment. 5 minutes later she replied, "The city fraud unit is already on it." That evening I walked to the corner store for milk. When I came back, Julian was leaning against my doorframe, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "you're going to want to be in the lobby. Trust me." "What's happening tomorrow?" I asked. He just tapped the side of his nose and walked away. I didn't sleep much that night, part nerves, part anticipation. For weeks, Patrick had been the one dictating the pace, pushing me into corners. But tomorrow I had the feeling the board was finally mine. At 9:02 the next morning I was in the lobby with a coffee, Mrs. Lowry on one side of me and Kenneth on the other. A hush settled over the hallway as 2 police cruisers pulled up to the curb, followed by a black SUV with City of Charleston Fraud Division stenciled on the side. Patrick arrived 5 minutes later, silver SUV rolling to a stop. He stepped inside, crisp as ever in a blazer, but the second he saw the officers his stride faltered. "Mr. Hensley?" one of the detectives asked. "Yes," Patrick said, voice tight. "You're being served with a warrant for financial records relating to Salt plus Palmetto Holdings and its subsidiaries." The detective handed him a thick packet. "We'll also need immediate access to the management office and storage areas." Patrick's eyes flicked around the lobby, landing on me. "This is your doing." I didn't look away. "This is your doing, Patrick." I just stopped pretending not to notice. While inspectors and officers moved past him, opening file cabinets and photographing documents, Alexandra slipped in through the door with her camera crew. She didn't need to say a word. The footage spoke for itself. A once smug developer standing by while the city boxed up his paper trail. By noon they were carrying out computers, binders, even a safe. Tenants gathered at the lobby windows, whispering. When it was over, one of the detectives paused beside me. "Ms. Whitmore, thank you for your cooperation. This isn't going away quietly." Patrick tried to leave then, but another officer stepped in his path, murmuring something about questioning downtown. The SUV door closed behind him and just like that he was gone. Over the next week the fallout was fast. The city voided all pending eviction notices from B Street. Helen confirmed that long-term leases would be honored, and relocation assistance was being arranged for anyone who still chose to move. Salt plus Palmetto's website went offline. News outlets across the state ran the story. Some even called it the B Street scandal. One evening I stood on my balcony with Mrs. Lowry, looking out over the quiet street. "You know," she said, "most people would have just taken the $2,000 and left." "Most people don't have neighbors like you," I replied. She smiled. "What are you going to do now?" I looked down at the folder on my table, now twice as thick, full of receipts, affidavits, and official seals. "First, I'm going to rest." Then, I took a sip of my tea. "I think I'll keep paying attention. Because in Charleston there's always another Patrick Hensley." And now I knew exactly how to deal with them.